My daughter-in-law smiled when she finally opened the door. She said, "We thought it would be easier for everyone if you stayed somewhere else for a while." Easier? That was the word she used. I had just had surgery on the body that carried her husband into this world, and she was standing in my hallway talking to me about easier. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I looked past her shoulder at the house I had owned for 31 years, and I thought about the envelope. The one I had asked my attorney to hold. The one no one in that house knew existed. I was still holding the small plastic bag the hospital had given me. Inside was my nightgown, my toothbrush, my reading glasses, and the discharge papers I had signed that morning. My body was still sore from the incision. My legs were unsteady, and my daughter-in-law was standing in my doorway like a gate that had quietly closed while I was sleeping. She did not step aside. She did not invite me in. She just stood there with that smile, the one she always used when she wanted something to sound reasonable. Behind her, I could see my reading chair had been moved to a different corner. There were shopping bags in the hallway that were not mine. The house smelled different, like someone else's laundry detergent, like someone else's home. I know how this sounds, like something from a movie, but I promise you, every word of this is real. And if you stay with me, I will tell you exactly what was in that envelope and what happened when I finally opened it. If this story resonates with you, I would be grateful if you would take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And if you are watching late at night, or early in the morning, or somewhere in between, I hope this story reminds you of something important about family, silence, and knowing your own worth. My name is Lorraine. I am 67 years old. I was a school administrator for 34 years, which means I spent most of my adult life solving problems quietly, listening more than I spoke, and watching people carefully before I ever said a word. I raised two sons, mostly on my own, after my husband David died of a heart attack when the boys were 9 and 12. I have never been the kind of woman who raises her voice. I have never made a scene in a restaurant, or cried in front of strangers, or called someone a name I would regret later. I believe that dignity is something you carry inside yourself. It is not something you perform for others. And I have always believed that silence, in the right moment, can be the most powerful thing you own. When Meredith told me it would be easier if I stayed somewhere else, I did not argue with her. I did not ask where I was supposed to go. I did not remind her that the house she was standing in belonged to me, that my name was on the deed, that I had paid off the mortgage alone after David died, working summers and weekends and tutoring on the side until every cent was mine. I did not say any of that. I just looked past her shoulder at the life I had built, the walls I had painted with my own hands, the kitchen where I had made 10,000 dinners, the hallway where my sons had measured their heights in pencil marks that were still there, hidden under the new paint Meredith had insisted on 2 years ago. And I thought about the envelope, the one I had prepared 6 weeks earlier. The one sitting in my attorney's office, sealed and notarized, and waiting for exactly this moment. They had no idea it existed, and that was going to matter very soon. Let me tell you about the house. I bought it 31 years ago with David. It was a fixer-upper in a neighborhood that most people thought would never improve. But David saw potential, and I saw a backyard big enough for 2 boys to run in, and we signed the papers on a Tuesday afternoon in April. I remember because the dogwoods were blooming and David said it felt like the house was welcoming us. He died 7 years later. Massive heart attack. No warning. One morning he was drinking coffee and laughing at something on the radio, and by noon he was gone. The boys were still young. Marcus was 12. Daniel was 9. And I was suddenly alone with a mortgage I could not afford on my salary. But I did not sell. I could not. That house was the last place David had touched, the last place his voice had echoed, the last place my sons had known their father. So I worked. I picked up extra shifts. I tutored after school. I taught summer programs. I did not buy new clothes for 6 years. I did not take a vacation for 8. And slowly, year by year, I paid off that mortgage alone. By the time Daniel graduated high school, the house was mine. Fully. Completely. No bank, no lien, no cosigner, just me. I raised my sons in that house. I taught them to cook in that kitchen. I watched them grow taller than me in that hallway. Marcus, my older boy, moved across the country for work. He calls every Sunday. He is steady and kind, and he has never once asked me for anything except my opinion. Daniel stayed close. He was always the softer one, the one who needed more reassurance, the one who looked to others for direction. I loved him for it. I thought it made him tender. When Daniel married Meredith 8 years ago, I welcomed her warmly. She was confident and organized, and she seemed to adore him. I hosted their engagement party in my backyard. I helped pay for the wedding. I babysat their children, 2 beautiful girls, while they built their careers. I co-signed a car loan when their credit was thin. I lent them money for a down payment that was never repaid, and I never mentioned it again because I did not want to embarrass them. And then, 3 years ago, Daniel lost his job. It was a layoff. Not his fault. The company downsized and he was caught in the middle. Meredith said they were struggling. She said they might lose their apartment. She said they just needed a few months to get back on their feet. I said, "Move in with me. I have the room. Stay as long as you need." That was 3 years ago. They never left. At first, it felt like a gift. I had spent so many years alone in that house, listening to the silence, eating dinner by myself, watching television without anyone to talk to. Suddenly, there was noise again. There were small shoes in the hallway and cartoons on Saturday mornings, and the sound of my granddaughters laughing in the backyard. I told myself this was what family meant. I told myself I was lucky. I gave up my sewing room so the girls could have their own space. I adjusted my schedule around theirs. I cooked for 5 instead of 1. I learned to be quieter in the mornings, to stay out of the way during homework time, to ask permission before using my own kitchen. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was worth it. But somewhere along the way, things began to shift. I cannot tell you exactly when it started. It was not one moment. It was 100 small ones, each so minor that I told myself I was imagining things. Meredith began reorganizing the kitchen without asking. She moved the dishes to higher shelves I could not reach. She put my spices in a cabinet I had to use a step stool to open. When I mentioned it, she laughed and said, "Oh, I just thought it made more sense this way. You do not cook as much as you used to anyway." Family dinners became conversations I was not part of. Meredith and Daniel would talk about finances, about plans, about the children's schedules, and I would sit at the end of the table like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. When I offered an opinion, Meredith would smile and say, "That is a nice thought," and then continue as if I had not spoken. My granddaughters started saying things like, "Mom says we should not bother Grandma so much. She needs her rest." I did not need rest. I needed to be part of their lives, but slowly, carefully, I was being moved to the edges. Daniel stopped asking my opinion on things. He used to call me before making big decisions. He used to value what I thought. Now he just nodded when Meredith spoke, as if her word was final. My mail started arriving already opened. Meredith said it was an accident. She said she thought it was for her. It happened 3 times. One evening, I heard Meredith on the phone with someone. She was in the kitchen and she did not know I was in the hallway. She said, "She is getting older. She does not really need all this space." And then she laughed and said, "We are just thinking ahead." I stood there holding my cup of tea and I did not move. I did not confront her. I did not ask what she meant. I just went back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed and thought about what I had heard. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself she did not mean it the way it sounded. I told myself family does not do that to each other. But something inside me had started to wake up. A few weeks later, I walked into the living room and found Meredith on the family computer. She closed the screen quickly when she saw me, but not quickly enough. I had already seen the words on the screen: elder care facilities, assisted living options, affordable memory care. I am 67 years old. I do not have memory problems. I do not need care. I live independently. I cook my own meals. I manage my own finances. I still drive. I still read. I still think clearly. But Meredith was researching how to put me somewhere else. I did not say anything. I smiled and asked if she wanted tea. She said no, and I went back to my room and sat in the chair by the window and thought about the envelope again. The one I had created years ago just in case. The one I had almost forgotten about. The one I now realized I needed to update. The moment that changed, everything happened 2 months before my surgery. I was walking down the hallway late at night. I could not sleep. My hip had been bothering me, which was why the surgery had been scheduled in the first place. I was going to the kitchen to get some water when I heard voices. Meredith and Daniel were in the kitchen. The light was dim. They were speaking quietly, but not quietly enough. Meredith was saying, "She does not need all this space. She barely leaves her room anyway. If we just had the title, we could refinance, add the extension, and finally have room for the kids." Daniel said something soft that I could not hear. Then Meredith said, "She is not going to live forever, Daniel. We are just thinking ahead." I stood in the dark hallway, and I did not breathe. I did not move. I listened to my son's silence, and I understood something I had been refusing to see. They were not waiting for me to leave. They were planning for it. The next morning, I called my attorney. Harold Eames has been my lawyer for 22 years. He handled David's estate. He helped me set up my will. He is careful and methodical, and he does not waste words. When I called and asked to see him urgently, he made time that same afternoon. I sat in his office, and I told him everything. The conversations, the mail, the computer search, the overheard words in the kitchen, and I asked him about something I had set up years ago, something I had almost forgotten. He opened a file drawer and pulled out a large envelope. It was thick and sealed, and it had my name on the front in my own handwriting. "This is the living trust you created 15 years ago," he said. "You updated it twice. Once when Marcus moved away. Once after Daniel got married." I remembered. I had created it after David died, when I was trying to make sure my sons would be protected if anything happened to me. But I had added something else 3 years ago, around the time Daniel and Meredith moved in. A clause. A safeguard. Harold opened the envelope and showed me the relevant page. The clause stated that if any family member attempted to transfer ownership of my property, coerce me regarding my assets, or manipulate my legal or financial standing, they would be automatically removed as beneficiaries of my estate. I had added that clause because I wanted to protect myself from hoping I was wrong. I did not tell anyone about the trust. I did not tell Daniel. I did not tell Meredith. I thanked Harold and asked him to hold the envelope for me. And then I went home and waited. 2 weeks before my surgery, I found the folder. It was sitting on the kitchen counter, left out carelessly. Or perhaps left out intentionally to pressure me. I do not know which. Inside were printouts about transferring property titles. There was a draft of something called a family agreement that would give Daniel and Meredith controlling interest in the house. There was a highlighted article about when elderly parents can no longer make decisions. And there was a sticky note in Meredith's handwriting. It said, "Get her to sign before she goes in. She will be too tired to argue after." I stood in my own kitchen and read those words. "Get her to sign before she goes in. She will be too tired to argue after." They were planning to take my house while I was recovering from surgery. They were planning to use my weakness against me. They were planning to make me too tired to fight. I took photographs of every page. I put the folder back exactly where I found it, and I moved up my appointment with Harold. The next day, I sat in his office again. I showed him the photographs. I showed him the sticky note. I told him what I wanted to do. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "Lorraine, they cannot take this house from you. Your name is the only name on the title. It has always been." "I know," I said. "And the clause you added 3 years ago is still active," he continued. "If they attempt to coerce you, manipulate you, or transfer ownership without your written consent, they lose everything." "I know," I said. "So what do you want to do?" "I want to wait," I said. "I want to see what they do when they think I cannot fight back." Harold nodded slowly. He understood. I went home. I acted normal. I did not confront anyone. I watched. In the 2 weeks before my surgery, I watched everything. I noticed Meredith and Daniel having hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I noticed my mail being collected by Meredith before I could see it. I noticed that my name had been removed from the family calendar on the refrigerator. I noticed that Meredith had started calling me Mom more often, especially in front of witnesses, as if she was practicing, as if she was establishing a pattern. I noticed that Daniel could not meet my eyes. One evening, I heard Meredith tell the children, Grandma might be going to live somewhere more comfortable soon. Will that not be nice for her? My granddaughters looked at me with confusion. I smiled at them and said nothing. I finished my tea. I went to my room. And I finalized my plans with Harold. The surgery was on a Tuesday. It was a hip replacement. Routine, but serious enough that I would need several days in the hospital and several weeks of recovery. I told Daniel and Meredith the date. I told them when I would be home. I told them I would need help. Meredith smiled and said, "Do not worry about anything. We will take care of everything while you are gone." I believed her, just not in the way she intended. I went into surgery without saying a word about the envelope. I told myself I would give them one last chance. Maybe Daniel would call. Maybe Meredith would soften. Maybe they would realize what they were doing and stop themselves before it was too late. But when I woke up in the hospital, groggy and sore and disoriented, there were no flowers. There was no card. There was no visit from my son. I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. Daniel did not come. Meredith did not come. The only person who visited was my friend, Patricia, who brought me magazines and held my hand and asked me what was happening with my family. I told her I did not know yet, but I would soon. When I was discharged, it was Patricia who picked me up. She drove me home. I was still weak, still moving slowly, still holding the small bag of belongings the hospital had given me. We pulled into my driveway, and I noticed something immediately. There was a new welcome mat at the front door. It was not mine. I walked to the door. I put my key in the lock. It did not work. I tried again. The key would not turn. The lock had been changed. I knocked on my own front door. There was a long pause. Then the door opened, and Meredith was standing there with that smile. The same smile she always used when she wanted something to sound reasonable. "We thought it would be easier for everyone if you stayed somewhere else for a while," she said. Easier. I looked past her shoulder. I saw my reading chair in the wrong corner. I saw shopping bags that were not mine. I saw the hallway where my sons had measured their heights, now cluttered with things I did not recognize. Daniel was nowhere in sight. I did not argue. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I said, "I understand," and I turned and walked back to Patricia's car. Patricia looked at me with horror. She said, "Lorraine, what just happened? That is your house." "I know," I said. "Drive me to Harold's office." We arrived at Harold's office 20 minutes later. I was still weak. I was still sore. But something inside me was perfectly calm. I sat in Harold's office and told him what had happened. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he opened the drawer and pulled out the envelope. "It is time," I said. He nodded. That afternoon, Harold sent a certified letter to Daniel and Meredith. The letter informed them that the house at 1847 Maple Lane remained solely in the name of Lorraine Davis. It informed them that any attempt to claim residency, ownership, or legal standing in the property was trespassing. It informed them that they had 72 hours to vacate the premises. And it informed them that, as of that morning, both Daniel and Meredith had been removed from my living trust entirely, per the clause they had triggered by attempting to coerce me. The phone calls started that evening. The first one was from Meredith. I did not answer. She left a voicemail saying there had been a misunderstanding. She said they were just trying to help. She said I was overreacting. The second call was from Daniel. His voice was shaky. He said, "Mom, please, just talk to me. We can work this out." I did not answer. The third call was from Meredith again. This time, her voice was harder. She said I was being selfish. She said I was tearing the family apart. She said I would regret this. I turned off my phone. On the fourth day, I returned to my house. Patricia drove me. A locksmith met us there. The front door was unlocked. Daniel and Meredith were already gone. They had left in a hurry. There were still shopping bags in the hallway. The refrigerator was full of food I had not bought. The welcome mat they had put out was crooked. The locksmith changed the locks. He handed me 2 new keys. I held them in my palm and looked around the house I had almost lost. My reading chair was still in the wrong corner. I moved it back. The weeks that followed were quiet. Daniel called me 3 times. The first call was angry. He accused me of destroying the family. He said I had chosen money over my own son. He said Meredith was devastated. He said I had ruined everything. I listened. I did not interrupt. When he finished, I said, I did not choose money over you, Daniel. You chose to lock me out of my own home while I was recovering from surgery. That was your choice. Not mine. He hung up. The second call was angrier. He said I had always favored Marcus. He said I had never really loved him. He said Meredith was right about me all along. I listened. I did not argue. When he finished, I said, I hope one day you understand what you did, and I hope you find the courage to be honest about it. Goodbye, Daniel. The third call came 2 weeks later. His voice was quieter. He said he was sorry. He said Meredith had convinced him it was the right thing to do. He said he had not realized how far things had gone. I listened, and then I said, I believe you are sorry, but sorry does not undo what you chose, and it does not rebuild what you broke. I love you, Daniel, but I cannot trust you, and I cannot let you back into my life until you have done the work to become someone trustworthy again. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, I understand. I have not spoken to him since. Marcus flew in the following month. He stayed for a week. He did not ask about the trust. He did not ask about the details. He just helped me replant the garden that Meredith had let die. He cooked me dinner every night. He sat with me on the porch and watched the sun go down. On the last night, he said, You did the right thing, Mom. I know, I said. He hugged me and flew home the next morning. I still live in the house at 1847 Maple Lane. I still drink my tea in the morning by the window David and I used to watch the birds from. I still read in my chair every evening. I still walk through the hallway where my sons measured their heights, even though the pencil marks are hidden now. I do not hate Daniel. I do not wish him harm. I hope he finds his way. I hope he becomes the man I raised him to be, not the man he let himself become. But I have learned something in all of this. For years, I believed that being a good mother meant giving without limits. I believed it meant forgiving without conditions. I believed it meant staying quiet when things hurt, because family was more important than my own comfort. I believed that if I just loved hard enough, my family would love me back the same way. But love is not supposed to erase you. It is not supposed to make you smaller. It is not supposed to lock you out of your own home and tell you it is for your own good. That envelope was not about money. It was not about the house. It was about knowing my own worth before anyone tried to tell me I had none. And if you ever find yourself standing on your own porch, holding a key that no longer works, being told by someone you loved that you are no longer welcome in your own life, I want you to remember something. You are allowed to prepare for the people who might hurt you. You are allowed to protect yourself, even from family. You are allowed to love someone and still hold a boundary they cannot cross. That is not cynicism. That is not cruelty. That is not giving up on people. That is wisdom, and it might just save your life.